You can hear the iron scraping against stone in the darkness. 20 feet underground, beneath the gladiator barracks of Capua, 70 men are sharpening kitchen knives. They move in silence, no whispers, no prayers. Just the rhythmic grinding of stolen blades against rock, each stroke bringing them closer to something that has never been done before. In 6 hours, they will do the impossible. They will transform cooking utensils into weapons of revolution. And before this night ends, the most powerful empire on earth will learn to fear the men it thought it owned. Before we go deeper into this story, I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. It absolutely amazes me that a rebellion from over 2,000 years ago still captures the imagination of people across every continent. Now, let's step back into that blood-soaked night in 73 BC. The Roman Republic in 73 BCE was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. Its legions had crushed Carthage, subdued Greece, and conquered lands from Spain to Asia Minor. But beneath this imperial glory festered a moral rot that would nearly destroy it all. Between 30 and 40% of Italy's population lived in bondage, not as citizens, not even as fully human, but as property. Slaves were the engine that powered Roman grandeur. They worked the fields, built the roads, staffed the households, and died in the arenas for entertainment. The gladiatorial games weren't mere spectacle. They were Rome's most sophisticated form of psychological control, a public theater. Of death designed to remind the enslaved masses of their place, watch your fellow slaves die for sport. Understand your insignificance, accept your fate. The system had worked flawlessly for centuries. Then a Thracian prisoner of war arrived at Lentulus Batiatus's gladiator school in Capua, and everything changed. His name was Spartacus, though we know almost nothing of his life before enslavement. Roman historians, who wrote the only surviving accounts, couldn't bring themselves to record much about the man who would humiliate their legions. But the fragments that remain paint a picture of someone extraordinary. He moved like a soldier, not just a fighter. His tactics in the arena puzzled the trainers. He fought with the precision of someone who'd commanded men in battle, not just performed for crowds. Batiatus's compound was a fortress designed to contain living weapons. 20-foot walls encircled the barracks. Armed guards patrolled every corner. Iron bars sealed the windows. At night, gladiators were chained to their beds like animals. These weren't ordinary slaves. Each represented an investment worth 20 years of a common worker's wages. They were premium merchandise, trained killers whose only purpose was to make their owners wealthy through blood and death. The daily routine was calculated to break spirits while building bodies, for in the morning the clanging of iron announced the new day. 10 hours of relentless training followed wooden swords crashing against shields, sand grinding beneath feet, the stench of sweat and straw thick in the underground cells. The survival rate in the arena was actually quite higher. 90% lived through their matches. But that statistic meant nothing. Every gladiator knew that despite their value, despite their fame, they were nothing beyond the next show. They were worth fortunes, but valued as nothing. In the darkness of those cells, conversations began to spread like wildfire. Spartacus spoke of mountains where free men lived, of battles where warriors chose their own cause. Other gladiators listened. Crassus, an undefeated Gaul, whose strength was legend. Inamos, a doctor who'd been forced to train men to kill, but dreamed of teaching different lessons. Castus and Gannicus Germans, who remembered forests their feet would never touch again. 200 men imprisoned together, knowing their lives meant nothing beyond entertainment. That's when the impossible began to take shape. The plan was betrayed before it could begin. A gladiator, hoping to curry favor with Batatus, sold information about the conspiracy. Executions were ordered for morning. Time had run out. Here's where the story pivots on a detail so small it almost escaped history. The guards didn't check the kitchen that night. 70 men couldn't wait for dawn. They armed themselves with whatever they could steal meat: cleavers, cooking knives, iron skewers, weapons that respectable Roman soldiers would never even consider carrying into battle. Then Spartacus demonstrated why he was different from every other gladiator who'd ever dreamed of freedom. The Thracian combat techniques he employed were devastatingly efficient in close quarters, while arena fighting favored theatrical flourishes designed to please crowds. His style emphasized pure lethality strikes to disable, movements to confuse, tactics to overwhelm. Crassus fought beside him, his massive frame crashing through Roman formations like a human battering ram. Inamos directed the assault with a trainer's precision, turning chaos into coordinated attack. The compound erupted. Guards expecting cowering slaves met organized resistance. Kitchen implements found throats and gaps in armor. Within minutes, the impossible happened. Gladiators poured through the gates of Capua's most secure facility, leaving behind the bodies of their captors and the chains that had defined their existence. They could have scattered into Italy's vastness, disappeared individually into the countryside. Instead, Spartacus led them to Mount Vesuvius. The volcano's slopes offered perfect defensive positions: steep approaches, hidden caves, abundant fresh water. But more importantly, it sent a message that echoed across Italy: we're not running, we're building something new. Word spread faster than Rome could respond. In 3 days, 3,000 followers had climbed the mountain. Not just fighting men, families, elderly children, everyone who heard the impossible news that gladiators had beaten Roman guards and lived. Farmers abandoned their fields. Miners fled the quarries. Household slaves slipped away in darkness. Every arrival carried the same expression: disbelief mixed with desperate hope. The Senate, dismissing this as a minor policing issue, sent Praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber with 3,000 militia, even proper legionaries. They surrounded Vesuvius's only known path, confident that hunger would force surrender within days. What happened next still baffles military historians. Spartacus discovered wild vines growing on the volcano's far side, on cliffs everyone deemed unclimbable. The rebels worked through the night, weaving rope ladders strong enough to hold armored men. As Glaber's troops watched the main path, Spartacus led his forces down sheer rock faces in complete darkness. Glaber woke to his camp in flames. Gladiators who'd spent years studying death were now teaching its lessons to Roman militia. The praetor himself barely escaped, leaving behind equipment for thousands proper swords, shields, armor, military-grade weapons, from kitchen knives to a fully equipped army in 3 days. The impossible had happened, and it would keep happening. Every successful raid brought more followers: 10,000 by month's end, 20,000 by winter, 40,000 by spring. This wasn't a mob. Spartacus transformed this human flood into something Rome had never imagined. Gladiators became drill instructors, spreading the arena's lessons of discipline and weapons training through the ranks. But Spartacus added something uniquely his: battlefield tactics, strategic thinking, the true arts of war beyond entertainment. Within 6 months, slaves had become an army that terrified Roman legions. Rome sent 3 separate expeditions, and 3 times they met crushing defeat. Praetor Publius Verenius lost his horse and nearly his life. His subordinates fell in battle. Roman military standards, their sacred eagles became decorations in rebel camps. Each victory proved what Romans thought impossible. Slaves could beat citizens. Gladiators could defeat soldiers. The oppressed could become conquerors. But Spartacus did something that revealed the depth of his transformation. After defeating Roman forces, he ordered gladiatorial games, using captured soldiers as unwilling participants. The message was crystalline. Now you'll understand what it feels like. Romans forced to fight and die in the sand for the entertainment of former slaves. The role reversal was complete, and it struck at the psychological heart of Roman power. Archaeological evidence reveals the scale of what Spartacus built weapon manufacturing sites. Training grounds, supply depots. This wasn't a revolt. It was a nation being born in violence and hope. By winter of 73 BCE, Spartacus commanded between 70 and 100,000 followers. That's larger than most Roman armies. Dispatches from terrorized landowners flooded the capital. They move like locusts, one wrote, but locusts that fight like legions. The Senate panicked at levels not seen since Hannibal crossed the Alps. Here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Instead of marching on Rome itself, while the capital remained paralyzed by indecision, Spartacus turned south. Historians still debate why. Some claim he aimed for Sicily, planning to inspire an island-wide revolt among its massive slave population. Others suggest he simply wanted to lead his people home Thracians, to Thrace Gauls to Gaul, Germans to Germania. The leadership split over this decision. Crassus advocated continuing the rampage through Italy, growing stronger with each victory. Spartacus seemed torn between revolutionary and shepherd, between toppling Rome and saving his people. Then the army divided. Crassus took 30,000 Gauls and Germans to ravage central Italy. Spartacus led the remainder toward the southern coasts. Two hammers striking separately rather than one unified blow. It was the beginning of the end. Unity had made them unstoppable. Division made them mortal. Crassus's forces carved a path of terror through Roman settlements, viewing each victory as payback for generations of oppression. But near Mount Garganus, surrounded by fresh Roman legions, his luck ran out. In a single day, 12,300 rebels died. Crassus himself fell, leading a final charge, the undefeated Gaul, defeated at last. When news reached Spartacus, his response revealed the arena's lasting poison in his soul. He organized funeral games for Crassus using 300 Roman prisoners. Citizens forced to fight each other while former slaves cheered. Some prisoners were military tribunes, others were local magistrates. All died in the sand, their blood mixing with generations of gladiator blood before them. But Rome was done sending pretenders and politicians to handle the rebellion. They sent a man whose wealth exceeded kingdoms and whose ambition knew no bounds, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was the richest man in Rome. His silver mines generated more wealth daily than most citizens saw in their lifetimes. He'd built his fortune buying burning buildings cheap, using his private fire brigade to save them, then selling them back at enormous profit. Now he would purchase military glory with rebel blood. His first act as supreme commander revealed his nature. When one of his legions fled before rebel forces, Crassus revived decimation, an ancient punishment where every 10th soldier was beaten to death by his own comrades. Soldiers, drawing the death lots, begged for mercy. Crassus watched, stone-faced as friends clubbed friends to death. One executed soldier was a senator's son. Another was his own lieutenant's cousin. The screaming lasted from dawn until noon. The army that emerged from this horror was transformed, they feared, their general more than any enemy. While Spartacus negotiated with Cilician pirates to sail for Sicily, Crassus prepared his trap. The pirates took Spartacus's gold and sailed away, leaving thousands stranded on Italian beaches. Then Roman engineers worked their dark magic. They built a wall 40 miles long, 15 feet high, with a deep trench across the entire toe of Italy. In weeks, they turned geography into a prison. The rebels woke to find themselves caged, with winter at their backs and 6 legions at their front. 100,000 people needed food daily, and Crassus had evacuated everything edible. Foraging parties met Roman steel. The rebels began eating horses, then leather, then anything that might sustain life. But Spartacus had learned something in the arena. Desperation breeds innovation. On a freezing night with snow falling thick, he ordered something that defied belief. Rebels killed 300 cattle, tied bundles of wood to their horns, set them ablaze, and drove them at a section of Roman wall. In the chaos of flaming cattle charging through darkness, Spartacus led a breakthrough. A third of his army punched through Crassus's engineering marvel before Romans could respond. Running battles across southern Italy followed, testing both armies to their breaking point. But attrition favored Rome. Crassus could summon fresh legions with a letter. Spartacus couldn't train new fighters fast enough to replace losses. The mathematics of rebellion were inexorable. Before the final battle at the Silurius River in 71 BCE, Spartacus did something that became legend. He drew his sword and killed his own horse in front of his entire army. "If we win," he told his men, "there'll be thousands of Roman horses. If we lose, I won't need one." 100,000 souls united by chains, and fury heard their leader accept no possibility of retreat. The battle formations that morning told the story. Crassus arranged his legions in traditional Roman fashion, disciplined, methodical, grinding. Spartacus placed his best fighters at the spear point, aimed directly at Crassus's position. This wasn't strategy anymore. It was revenge seeking its target. The fighting lasted over 10 hours. Archaeological evidence reveals weapons scattered across miles, mass graves hastily dug, the river itself redirected by the volume of bodies damming its flow. Witnesses describe Spartacus cutting through Roman lines like death itself, always pushing toward Crassus's standard. He killed 2 centurions personally. For a moment, the impossible seemed ready to happen again. But numbers tell their inevitable story. Fresh Roman reserves replaced exhausted front lines. Rebel reinforcements didn't exist. When Roman cavalry flanked the rebel position, the end became mathematical. Yet Spartacus kept advancing, kept killing, kept seeking Crassus. The exact moment of his death remains history's mystery. Romans claimed he died fighting, surrounded by enemies, still trying to reach their general. Its body was never identified among the dead, either mangled beyond recognition or hidden by followers who refused to let Rome have even his corpse. 60,000 rebels died at the Silurius River. 6,000 survivors surrendered, expecting quick military execution. What Crassus planned was neither quick nor honorable. The hammering started at dawn and didn't stop for weeks. 6,000 crosses rose along the Appian Warum's most important highway, connecting the capital to the south. Crassus personally supervised the logistics. Every mile, 50 crosses. every cross carefully positioned for maximum visibility, every victim selected to tell a story. This wasn't just execution. It was industrial-scale psychological warfare, designed to ensure no slave would ever dare dream of freedom again. The crucifixion process reveals Roman efficiency at its most monstrous. First came the scourging whips, embedded with bone and metal tearing flesh from backs. Then the crossbeam carrier bulls, forced to drag their own execution tools through gearing crowds. The nailing came next year in spikes through wrists and feet, positioned to avoid major arteries, ensuring maximum suffering before death. The Appian Way stretched 120 miles from Rome to Capua, where it all began. For decades afterward, travelers described the journey. Every few steps, another dying rebel. The strongest lasted days. Bodies weren't removed, they were left as warnings. The stench carried for miles. Crows grew fat, the road became synonymous with death itself. Personal stories emerge from the horror that haunt more than statistics. A Roman matron identified her former cook among the crucified and begged permission to bury him. She was refused. A veteran recognized his own former orderly. They'd served together in Macedonia before the man was enslaved for debt. Children born during the rebellion died on crosses beside parents who dreamed of their freedom. But something unexpected happened. Those crosses became more than warnings. They became monuments. 6,000 men who chose death over returning to chains. 6,000 testimonies to human dignity that couldn't be crucified. 6,000 reasons why oppression breeds its own destruction. Crassus won his victory, but history rendered its own verdict. General Pompey, returning from Spain, encountered 5,000 rebels who'd fled the final battle. He destroyed them in hours, then claimed credit for ending the entire rebellion. The Senate granted Pompey a full triumph, the highest military honor. Crassus received only an ovation, a lesser celebration reserved for victories over unworthy enemies. The insult cut deeper than any gladiator's blade. Crassus had spent his fortune, decimated his own troops, and engineered impossible victories only to watch Pompey steal the glory. The rivalry this created would poison Roman politics for decades, eventually helping to destroy the Republic itself. Crassus, driven by the desire for military glory that Spartacus had denied him, would die in Parthia in 53 BCE. The Parthians, knowing his reputation for greed, executed him by pouring molten gold down his throat. Even in death, Spartacus won. Crassus never escaped the shadow of the slave who made Rome tremble. But Spartacus transcended his defeat in ways Rome couldn't prevent. Even historians who'd benefited from slavery couldn't hide their respect. Plutarch called him distinguished by intelligence and humanity. Appian noted his great spirit and strength. The gladiator who'd forced Romans to fight as gladiators had forced them to see him as human. His name became a whisper in slave quarters, a prayer in chain gangs, a promise in the darkest nights. Every subsequent revolt invoked his memory. When slaves rose in Sicily, decades later, they called their leader Spartacus Reborn. Medieval peasant uprisings claimed his legacy. Haitian revolutionaries knew his story. The gladiator who made Rome tremble inspired trembling across millennia. The ultimate irony burns through history. Emperor Commodus, great-great-grandson of emperors, fought as a gladiator for pleasure. He died strangled by a wrestler, a slave. The arena that created Spartacus eventually consumed Rome's rulers. Modern parallels multiply his meaning. Every factory uprising, every colonial rebellion, every march for dignity carries his echo. From chains to general in 3 days, the transformation terrifies power everywhere because it proves there are no natural slaves, only temporary chains. Perhaps his greatest victory was dying free. For 2 years he commanded his fate, chose his battles, protected his people, and died trying to personally kill his tormentor rather than accept capture. The man who entered Capua's gladiator school in chains left the world a free general. Rome could kill him, but it couldn't re-enslave him.